competency and suggests her mental health issues make her an unreliable witness. The judge shuts him down immediately and tells him to move on to his next question. Veronica takes the stand next and explains how she noticed Mom covering her mouth during dinner and barely touching her food. She describes taking photos in the bathroom when Mom showed her the missing teeth because she wanted to document what she saw, but wasn't sure what to do with the evidence. The defense lawyer asks why she waited 2 days to call police if she was so concerned, and Veronica admits she was scared of making things worse for us. She says she spent those 2 days researching abuse reporting and trying to decide if intervention would help or just make Dad angrier. I understand her hesitation completely, because I lived with that same calculation every single day. Hunter asks her to describe Mom's condition in detail, and Veronica explains that 12 missing teeth isn't something you see from poor dental care or genetics. She says Mom could barely chew and spoke with a lisp and seemed terrified the whole visit. The defense tries to suggest Veronica has a grudge against Dad from some family conflict, but she calmly states she barely knew him before the visit, and only acted because what she witnessed seemed criminal. The defense presents their case next, and Dad's lawyer shows the forged medical records to the jury, while calling a dentist who testifies about genetic conditions that can cause tooth loss. This dentist explains various diseases and disorders that affect teeth, and admits it's theoretically possible for multiple family members to have similar dental problems. But when Hunter cross-examines him, she asks if he ever personally examined any of us, and he admits he never met us. She asks if the medical records show any actual genetic testing or just claims of family history, and he acknowledges there's no lab work. Hunter shows him the forensic photos of extracted teeth with tool marks, and asks if genetic disease leaves metal scraping on tooth roots. He admits it doesn't. She asks if genetic conditions cause trauma to surrounding gum tissue consistent with forced extraction, and he says no. By the end of his testimony, the defense's medical expert has basically confirmed that our injuries don't match any natural disease process. The trial runs for 3 full days with both sides presenting evidence and calling witnesses. Hunter's closing argument walks the jury through every piece of physical evidence, starting with the pliers that have 4 different DNA profiles on them. She describes the photos of our mouths and the forensic analysis of trauma patterns. She reminds them of testimony from me and Mom and Claire and my brother, who all described the same ritual in the same chair with the same tools. She explains that the defense wants them to believe in an impossible coincidence, where 3 women in one family all developed identical dental problems, that somehow required the father to keep extraction pliers as a family heirloom. She tells them the evidence proves systematic violence beyond any reasonable doubt. The defense's closing argument claims we're all lying to escape consequences for our own failures, and that Dad is a traditional father being persecuted for maintaining family discipline. His lawyer suggests the DNA on the pliers could be from legitimate dental emergencies, where Dad helped during actual medical crises. He points to the medical records as proof of genetic problems, and argues that the prosecution is criminalizing a father's attempts to help his family. The jury gets the case after lunch on the 3rd day, and we all wait in a victim conference room while they think it over. Tanner brings sandwiches, but I can't eat anything because my stomach is twisted in knots. Mom sits very still staring at her hands, and I wonder what she's thinking after spending so many years believing this was normal. 6 hours later, the bailiff calls us back to the courtroom because the jury has reached a verdict. My legs shake walking back into that room, and I have to focus on breathing normally. The jury foreman stands up when the judge asks if they've reached a verdict and says they have. The judge asks about the first count of aggravated assault, and the foreman says guilty. The second count of aggravated assault gets the same answer. Child abuse guilty. Witness intimidation guilty. The foreman reads guilty 12 times for 12 different charges, and Dad just sits there with no expression on his face like he's watching a boring movie. I feel something loosen in my chest that's been tight and hard for years. It's not happiness exactly because there's too much damage for happiness, but it's relief that someone finally believed us. The judge thanks the jury and sets a sentencing hearing for 2 weeks from today. Hunter catches up with us in the hallway and asks if I want to give a victim impact statement at sentencing. I'm scared of being in the same room with Dad again and having to speak while he stares at me, but I also want him to hear directly from me how his actions destroyed our family and took away our ability to feel safe. I tell Hunter I'll do it, and she says she'll help me prepare a statement that covers what I want to say. Mom decides she wants to give a statement too, and Hunter explains that Claire can submit a written statement that the prosecutor will read since she's not ready to attend in person. The 2 weeks pass in a strange blur where I'm living at Aunt Haley's house going to my new school, but my mind is stuck on what I'm going to say at sentencing. I write about 15 different versions of my statement before I find words that feel true. Aunt Haley helps me practice reading it out loud so I don't freeze up in court. The sentencing hearing is in the same courtroom, and I sit in the front row with Mom while we wait for the judge to come in. Dad is brought in wearing jail clothes, and he looks thinner than I remember, but his face still has that same cold expression. The judge asks if any victims want to make statements before sentencing, and Hunter calls me first. I walk to the podium with my paper shaking in my hands and start reading about how I learned to make myself invisible in my own house. I describe never knowing which version of Dad would come home each night and how I still flinch when I hear loud voices or heavy footsteps. I explain that I can't eat dinner with other people without feeling panic, because dinner was when Dad would announce who was getting punished. My voice cracks a few times, but I get through the whole thing while Dad stares at me with no emotion. Mom reads her statement next about losing her ability to smile and eat normally, and how she covered her mouth for years because she was ashamed. She talks about her wedding night, and how she thought marriage was supposed to be about love and partnership, but instead she got violence and control. Hunter reads Claire's statement, which describes years of abuse and how she still has nightmares about the chair and the pliers. Claire wrote that she's working on recovery but doesn't know if she'll ever feel completely safe again. The judge listens to all 3 statements without interrupting, and then asks Dad if he wants to say anything before sentencing. Dad stands up and says he was just maintaining family order the way his father taught him, and that modern society has lost respect for traditional family structures. He doesn't apologize or show any understanding that he hurt us. The judge's face gets hard, and she tells Dad that his actions constitute torture, and that no tradition justifies systematic violence against family members. She sentences him to 15 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation, with mandatory anger management and mental health treatment. She orders him to pay money for our dental work and therapy, though Hunter warned us we probably won't see much of that. My brother, who testified and took the plea deal, gets probation with intensive supervision and mandatory therapy. The judge says she considered his age when Dad started forcing him to participate, and the control Dad had over him. My other brother, who refused to cooperate, gets 3 years in prison as an accomplice. The judge tells him he made choices to participate, even though he was also a victim of Dad's control, and those choices have consequences. After sentencing, Tanner meets with Mom and me to help us apply for victim compensation funds that will cover dental work and therapy and some living expenses. The paperwork is overwhelming, with dozens of forms asking for detailed information about the abuse and our financial situation. Tanner walks us through every single form and explains what each section means and why they need that information. Just knowing there's financial support available makes recovery feel more real and possible instead of some distant idea. Mom starts the dental reconstruction process the following week with a specialist who works with abuse survivors. The specialist explains that Mom will need implants to replace the missing teeth, which will take several months of appointments and procedures. Mom cries during the consultation, but the specialist says those are normal tears, because getting treatment means acknowledging what happened and starting to heal. Just having a treatment plan gives Mom hope for the first time in years, and she calls me that night to say she scheduled her first implant surgery. I start therapy twice a week with a counselor who works with abuse survivors. The sessions happen in a small office with soft chairs and a box of tissues that gets used more than I expected. My therapist asks me to talk about my brothers and how I feel about their roles and what happened. I tell her I'm angry at them for holding us down, but also confused because they were scared of Dad too. She helps me understand that I can recognize they were victims while still holding them responsible for choosing to participate instead of refusing or getting help. This idea feels complicated and uncomfortable, but also true in a way that makes sense. We spend weeks working through these feelings, and I cry during most sessions, but afterward I feel lighter, like I've set down something heavy I'd been carrying. My therapist never pushes me to forgive anyone or move on faster than I'm ready. She just listens and asks questions that help me figure out what I actually think versus what I was taught to think. Claire moves to a long-term therapeutic foster home about a month after sentencing. The foster parents specialize in helping kids who've been through serious trauma, and they have experience with the kind of damage our family did. She starts attending a special school designed for trauma survivors, where the classes are smaller, and the teachers understand why she might have trouble concentrating or need to leave the room sometimes. She calls me every Sunday afternoon, and we talk about normal things like TV shows we're watching and songs we heard on the radio. These conversations feel strange at first because we never just talked about regular stuff before. Everything in our house was always tense and careful. But slowly we build a different kind of relationship that isn't only about shared pain. She tells me about a girl at her school who's teaching her to paint, and I tell her about a book I'm reading for English class. The calls are short because talking still tires her out, but they matter more than long conversations would. 6 months after the trial, I get my report card and see that I made honor roll for the first time ever. All A's and B's when I used to get C's and D's because I was too scared and tired to focus on schoolwork. Aunt Haley sees the grades and immediately says we're going out to celebrate. She takes me to a restaurant where I order whatever I want without worrying about the price, and she tells me she's proud of how hard I've worked to build a new life. I feel embarrassed by the praise because I don't think I did anything special. I just went to the school and did my homework. But she says that doing normal things after trauma isn't easy, and I should recognize my own strength. The dinner feels good in a quiet way that's different from big dramatic moments. Just sitting in a restaurant eating good food and talking about my future, like I actually have one. Mom sends me a photo one afternoon showing her smiling with her mouth full of new teeth. The first phase of her dental reconstruction is complete, and she looks completely different. Younger somehow and lighter, like years of weight lifted off her shoulders. She can eat solid food again without pain, and she doesn't cover her mouth when she talks anymore. The text with the photo says she started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter helping other women who are trying to leave dangerous situations. She meets with them one-on-one and shares her story so they know recovery is possible even when everything feels hopeless. I call her after seeing the photo and she sounds happier than I've heard in years. She talks about the women she's helping and how good it feels to turn her experience into something useful. I tell her I'm proud of her and mean it completely. My school counselor helps me start applying to colleges during my senior year. We focus on schools that have strong support services for students with trauma histories, because I know I'll need help adjusting to college life. The counselor shows me information about campus counseling centers and student support groups and schools with programs specifically for survivors. A year ago, the idea of going to college felt impossible, like something that happened to other people, but not to girls like me. Now it feels like a real future I can actually work toward. I fill out applications and write essays about overcoming challenges and request transcripts from my old school. The process is overwhelming with deadlines and requirements, but the counselor breaks everything into small steps. Each application I submit feels like proof that I'm building something new. Claire visits me and Aunt Haley for a weekend in early spring. Her foster parents drive her to the city and drop her off Friday evening. We spend the weekend doing normal sister things like watching movies on the couch and baking cookies that turn out slightly burned but taste good anyway. She's still in therapy and taking medication for anxiety and depression, but she seems more present than before. More like a person, and less like a ghost. Saturday night we're watching a comedy, and I make some stupid joke about the main character, and Claire actually laughs. A real laugh that sounds surprised, like she forgot she could do that. The sound is so beautiful I almost cry, but I don't because I don't want to make the moment weird. We just keep watching the movie and eating our burned cookies and being sisters in a way we never got to be before. Manning calls on a Tuesday to tell me that Dad filed an appeal of his conviction. His lawyer warned us this would probably happen because convicted people almost always appeal. Hunter gets on the phone too and explains that the appeal likely won't succeed because the evidence against Dad was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses, physical evidence, expert testimony, all of it pointing to systematic abuse over years. But the appeal means the case isn't completely over yet. There will be more legal proceedings and possibly another hearing where we might have to testify again. I feel my stomach drop when Manning tells me this because I thought we were done. I thought sentencing meant it was finished and we could move forward. But apparently legal cases don't end cleanly like I hoped. They drag on with appeals and motions and more waiting. Manning promises to keep me updated on everything and says I probably won't have to testify again, but he can't guarantee it. After the call, I sit in my room feeling tired in a deep way that sleep won't fix. My English teacher assigns an essay about overcoming adversity, and I decide to write about my experience escaping abuse. I don't use real names or identifying details, but I write about the fear and the running and the slow process of building a new life. The teacher reads it and asks if she can submit it to a writing contest for survivors. I agree, even though the idea of strangers reading my story makes me nervous. A few months later, I find out I didn't win the contest, but my essay gets published in a collection of survivor stories. Seeing my words in print feels strange and powerful at the same time. I read the essay 3 times trying to recognize myself in the story, and realize I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm not proud exactly, but I'm not hiding either. What happened to me was real and wrong, and now it's documented in a way that might help someone else feel less alone. Mom calls me one evening crying, but the tears sound happy instead of sad. She just got her final dental implants placed and the dentist cleared her to eat whatever she wants. She tells me she ate an apple that afternoon for the first time in years. A whole apple with the skin on, biting through it like a normal person without pain or difficulty. She cries telling me this, and I cry listening because something as simple as eating an apple represents so much more than food. She also mentions she started dating someone she met at the domestic violence shelter support group. A man who left his own abusive marriage and understands what recovery looks like. She's taking things very slowly because trust is hard after what Dad did, but she's allowing herself to imagine a different kind of relationship. One based on respect instead of fear. I tell her I'm happy for her and I mean it, even though part of me worries she'll get hurt again. But she's an adult making her own choices, and all I can do is support her. On the 1-year anniversary of my escape, I visit the shelter where I first stayed after running from Dad. The staff members remember me and hug me carefully, asking how I'm doing. I thank them for helping me that first terrible night when I showed up barefoot and shaking. They tell me they're glad I'm safe now and ask about my plans for the future. Tanner happens to be at the shelter meeting with a new client, and he comes over to say hello. He tells me I was brave for running and for testifying and for rebuilding my life. I shake my head and explain that I wasn't brave at all. I was desperate and terrified and just trying to survive. Sometimes desperation looks like courage from the outside, but it doesn't feel courageous when you're living it. It feels like panic and instinct and doing the only thing possible in an impossible situation. Tanner listens and nods and says that maybe courage and desperation aren't as different as people think. Maybe they're both just different words for refusing to give up. I don't know if I agree, but I appreciate him listening without arguing. We talk for a few more minutes about my school and Claire's progress and Mom's dental work. Then I leave the shelter and walk to Aunt Haley's car, feeling grateful for everyone who helped me get from that desperate night to this ordinary afternoon. A few weeks later, I attend Claire's graduation from her therapeutic school program. The ceremony is small and quiet, with just the students and their families in a community center room decorated with handmade banners. Claire walks across the little stage to accept her certificate, and she's smiling for real. Not the fake smile she used to wear at home. Afterward, she comes over and hugs me tight. Something she hasn't done in years. She tells me she's going to regular high school next fall with support services in place, and that she's nervous but ready. Then she says something that makes my chest feel warm. She wants to be a therapist someday to help other kids like us. I tell her she'll be amazing at it, and I mean every word because she understands what it's like in a way most people never will. These days, I'm sleeping through most nights without nightmares, which still surprises me when I wake up and realize I made it through. When I do wake up afraid, heart racing, and hands shaking, I can calm myself down now. I remind myself that I'm safe in Aunt Haley's house. I remind myself that Dad is in prison where he can't hurt anyone. I remind myself that I have people who love me and want me to be okay. The fear doesn't disappear completely, and maybe it never will. But it's not the loudest voice in my head anymore. It's just one voice among many, and I can choose which ones to listen to. That feels like the truest kind of freedom I've ever known.